Just before midnight, Congress dodged a government shutdown. That's after both chambers passed a short-term bill to extend funding through February 18th. Oklahoma is suing the Biden administration over the mandate to have the National Guard vaccinated. They argue it's unconstitutional and federal overreach. And the CDC posts new order requiring negative COVID-19 tests for international travelers within 1 day of entering the U.S. Tune into Deep Dive as we explore these topics and more. Hello and welcome. This is Deep Dive and I'm Tiffany Meier. As the clock ticked dangerously close to midnight, Congress passed a stopgap bill, dodging a government shutdown.
There will be no government shutdown.
After a tense showdown between lawmakers, they reached a bipartisan agreement, averting a government shutdown.
This agreement will give appropriators in both parties and in both chambers time to reach a comprehensive agreement on appropriations by February the 18th of next year.
Earlier in the day, some Senate Republicans demanded a separate vote to defund the Biden administration's rule that requires employers with 100 or more employees to ensure their employees are fully vaccinated against COVID-19 or undergo regular testing and wear face masks in the workplace.
It's not government's job. It's not within government's authority to tell people that they must be vaccinated. And if they don't get vaccinated, they'll get fired. It's wrong. It's immoral.
No precedent exists in American history for punishing private employers who don't enforce government vaccination edicts.
House Speaker Nancy Pelosi called the GOP senators' efforts to stall government funding silly.
We're not going to go for their anti-vaxxing, okay? So if you think that's how we're going to keep government open, forget that.
A shutdown would have cost the U.S. economy $1.8 billion for each week the government is closed, according to estimates by S&P Global Ratings. The Senate voted along party lines, squashing the Marshall Lee Amendment to remove funding for the Biden administration's COVID-19 vaccine mandates. The bill will next go to President Biden for his signature. Congress now has more time to work on a longer-term funding plan for the full fiscal year. Meanwhile, Congress faces another urgent deadline. The government is approaching its nearly $29 trillion borrowing limit, which could be reached by mid-December. Failure to extend or lift the limit could trigger a default. And America's economic recovery is slowing a bit. The Labor Department says employers added 210,000 jobs to the economy in November. That's well below analysts' expectations of 550,000. It's also the smallest number of jobs added since December 2020. Some economists expect hiring to slow down this month because of concerns over the new Omicron coronavirus variant. Meanwhile, the unemployment rate fell to 4.2%, a new pandemic-era low. But overall, the economy is still down nearly 4 million jobs from pre-pandemic levels. Surging inflation and signs of continued labor market recovery have put pressure on Fed policymakers to accelerate their schedule for scaling back or tapering the central bank's $120 billion in monthly purchases of U.S. Treasury and mortgage-backed securities. Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell, in recent testimony, suggested a faster taper than the $15 billion per month reduction that's currently in place, while acknowledging that it's time to retire the term transitory as a description of the current bout of inflation, which hit a 31-year high in the 12 months through October and rose at a faster pace than in September. And now, let's turn to a brief update on Omicron in the U.S. There are now 8 confirmed cases of the new variant. New York Governor Kathy Hochul announced 5 cases of the Omicron variant have been detected in her state. This comes after cases were detected in Minnesota and Colorado. Hochul wrote on Twitter that the 5 cases of Omicron are not cause for alarm and that they knew the variant was coming.
That individual has already recovered from their symptoms. They tested positive but are already feeling well, and it was a very minor case. And that's something I want to put an exclamation point on. While this may be highly transmissible, at least from the early evidence, and again, more information is still forthcoming, we want people to know that the early cases that have arisen are not life-threatening.
She called on constituents to get vaccines and boosters and mask up, though she said authorities don't know how vaccines and boosters are holding up against Omicron. Of those 5 cases, one was a man who attended a convention in Manhattan in late November before returning home to Minnesota, and another in New York City's Long Island suburbs who had recently traveled to South Africa. State health officials confirmed an unvaccinated Hawaii resident recently contracted the Omicron strain. The person had not traveled recently. And an epidemiologist in the state said the adult contracted COVID a year ago. They aren't hospitalized and have mild to moderate symptoms. Those include headache, cough, and body ache.
The bottom line in terms of public prevention measures, they are essentially unchanged. So while the variant is something we will definitely want to watch and track, we still anticipate that vaccination is going to be one of the best ways to slow transmission.
She said the person lives on the island of Oahu, and Colorado's governor says the strain surfaced in his state as well.
It is somebody who just traveled to southern Africa and returned. She is experiencing mild symptoms and is isolating at home. She was vaccinated but had not been boosted.
And the new variant impacting travel rules. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention is changing COVID-19 testing requirements for international travelers coming to the U.S. Starting next week, the CDC requires a negative test result 1 day before air travel into the country. Previously, travelers who were fully vaccinated had to have tested negative for the virus within 3 days of their trip. Officials say this change is out of precaution due to the Omicron variant. The CDC still has not confirmed whether current vaccines adequately protect against the latest viral mutant. People who show they recovered from COVID within the past 90 days are exempt. That requires a valid document of recovery. The order takes effect on Monday, December 6th. And now let's turn to an update on the back and forth between the Pentagon and Oklahoma over whether or not the National Guard must comply. Oklahoma is now suing the Biden administration. Oklahoma Attorney General John O'Connor, Governor Kevin Stitt, the state of Oklahoma, and 16 members of the state's National Guard are suing the Biden administration. They are arguing to block the enforcement of its vaccine mandate. They argue it's unconstitutional and that the mandate is tantamount to federal overreach. According to a memo sent to military officials by U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin, unvaccinated members of the National Guard who fail to get their COVID-19 shots by the June 30, 2022 deadline will be barred from participating in drills, training, and other duties, unless they are granted an exemption in accordance with department policy. The lawsuit argues this vaccine mandate certainly interferes with the sovereign prerogatives of the state of Oklahoma. It undermines laws, public policy, dignity, and the interests of the state of Oklahoma in governing the field of public health, including vaccinations. State officials go on to argue that by seeking to strip the Oklahoma National Guard of Department of Defense funding for members who are not compliant with the vaccine requirement, the Biden administration is trying to disarm the state of Oklahoma from protecting itself, its territory, and its citizens. They argue the vaccine mandate ensures that many Oklahoma National Guard members will simply quit instead of getting a vaccine, a situation that will irreparably harm Oklahoman safety and security. Oklahoma state officials are asking the court to block the mandate for all federal employees, not just the National Guard. Last month, Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin said he has the authority to require members of the National Guard to get vaccinated against the virus after the Oklahoma National Guard's newly appointed commander refused to impose a vaccine mandate ordered by the Defense Department. The White House did not respond to a request for comment. Now, in some lighter news, billionaire Mark Cuban has so much money lying around, he decided to buy a town. He is now the owner of Mustang, Texas, located about 45 minutes south of Dallas. Cuban told the Dallas Morning News he bought it because a buddy needed to sell it. It's unclear how much the owner of the Dallas Mavericks paid for the 77 acres. In 2017, Mustang was reportedly up for sale for $4 million. Cuban didn't say what he plans to do with a tiny town of 21 people. Right now, there's just a trailer park and Whispers Cabaret Strip Club. Though on Friday, the club's name had been changed to Mark Cubaret on Google Maps. And now before we end, a police officer in Kentucky is helping 3 puppies he rescued near a crash site. The Louisville Metro Police Department posted this photo on its Facebook page. It shows the officer with the 3 pups he named Ollie, Larkwood, and Madison. The doggies are named after streets nearby where they were rescued last month. Police say the officer was responding to a crash when he heard noises coming from a nearby backpack. Inside were the 3 small puppies, but there was no sign of a mama dog. The officer took them to a local veterinary where workers cared for them. Police say the driver of the vehicle involved in the crash was wanted for outstanding felony warrants and was in possession of narcotics. But what do you think? Let me know below. Thanks for tuning in to Deep Dive. I'm Tiffany Meier, and have a wonderful weekend.